Hey guys, what's going on? Just a little heads up before we get into today's video. I will be discussing mainly the controls and brief thoughts on the game since this version is the spoiler-free review for Signalis, and tomorrow will be my very spoiler-intensive review for Signalis. So enjoy, and I'll see you guys in the video. What's going on, you guys? It's your Huggable Hipster here, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be diving into my spoiler-free review for Signalis. This game was actually really good. I have some issues with it, but overall I really think that this was such a wonderful game. It was such a throwback to OG horror and to classic horror like Resident Evil or Silent Hill 2 or 3. We're gonna go over some notes. Oh yeah, I got notes. So first we're gonna go over some of the mechanics because I feel like the settings in this game alone are so good. They're so immersively done. Immersive probably isn't the right word to use even, but they're so well done in the fact that you can control your playstyle. You can control how you play the game and your experience. So before we go into my opinion of the game briefly, since I'm not going to be going over a lot of the story, that'll be in tomorrow's very spoiler heavy review. I'm going to be going over a lot of the mechanics and what I liked about it and what my overall just experience of the game was. Difficulty / game immersion and elements are enhanced through the use of item resource management. I feel like this is very important in a game like this, especially when it's a callback to games like old school Resident Evil and Silent Hill 2 and 3. The atmosphere is also a major callback because whenever you look at a game that is not only somewhat pixelized, but it's very much dependent on how the user and how the player interact with the environment. I feel as if a lot of old school games are very much like you have to have good item management, you have to use your resources wisely, and you have to know what you're getting into before you actually buy the game, because old school games were difficult. They were really a challenge, and I feel like that's what a lot of modern day indie developers are trying to bring back to the forefront. Because I mean, hell, let's even take it back to Tormented Souls, which is a great callback to Silent Hill 2 and 3, where you actually have the transition between the nightmare versions of the world and the regular versions of the world. So there are different ways that you can do these callbacks of where it's not exactly copying, but it's enough of an inspiration of where the players know where these concepts and these motifs originated from. Another thing in the mechanics that I really like is that you have the choice to put on tank controls. And I don't know about any of you guys, but I absolutely love tank controls. I think it's just nostalgia more than anything. Now you guys are going to see some of the settings pop up over the screen somewhere here or over my face entirely of where I go over a lot of the settings and everything. There's so much of where you can customize your own experience. You can make it look like an old VHS player. You can have complete control, no pun intended, over the way you play this game. And I feel as if, just to go over the story briefly, no spoilers intended, but when you go into this game, you have to understand that whether it's an old school game or an old school inspired game, you have to do most of the legwork, which means you're looking at the notes, right? You're looking at bits and pieces of whenever you click on items to get more information, which also deal a lot with the story. These games aren't easy by any means, but if you've dealt with these kinds of games before, you know exactly what to do and how to go about them. So they're easy for people who have experienced these kinds of games. Now, the players who are going to find this game difficult are ones who, and I don't mean this in a bad way or a mean way, I mean this as a, oh, you've never dealt with this kind of game before, so how could you possibly know how to approach it way? So don't take it personally. But if this is your first time diving into an old school styled, survival horror game, I would highly suggest looking up a walkthrough in companion with this kind of game. If this is your first time doing these kinds of games and playing through this style of games, have it on hand in the background while you're playing as just an option to be like, hey, you know what? I need a little bit of a hand. Let me go to the walkthrough. Let me consult the tape. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a walkthrough. There's nothing wrong with having that. For me personally, I don't like using a walkthrough unless I am in absolute desperate need of one, but there's nothing wrong with using a walkthrough. There's nothing wrong with having help for a game. You play the way you want to play, and that's it. Now, when it comes to your controllers, so Let me preface this by saying this indie game has some of the best control work I've seen for an indie game. Works just as well with mouse and keyboard as it does with a controller. For the game for the first half, I used the mouse and keyboard, and for the last half of the game, I used my Xbox controller hooked up to my PC. Now in the controllers, you have controller controls, which kind of funny that they put controller controls, but you can have south controls, which you can't really format the way your buttons are. You can just format the way the type of control setting is, if that makes sense. You can have keyboard controls, which you have default, you have alternative, which are the only two that you can choose from at the moment. But other than that, it is really impressive because you can't go in and you can't like modify, like, oh, you can't say that I want Y to be X or B to be A. You can't, necessarily do that, but you can go in and say what type of control base is your preferable. Like I said earlier, you can choose tank controls, you can choose an alternative or default control setting. It really is up to what your play style is for the game. So let's go into some of my thoughts of the game, and there's some points that I think are really fundamental. The save points in this game, not necessarily a spoiler, but I will say this is a major callback to Silent Hill 2. Of where you have a TV that you are having a save point from, and it's a red screen, and having that like kind of fade to red save point, it's exactly what they did in Silent Hill 2. So I think that it's such a cool way of paying homage, paying respects to the games that basically influenced this one. I will also say, for those of you who love really intensive stories and everything like that, this one is kind of hard to follow if you don't read all the notes. Like, for the most part, I was reading the notes, I was trying to keep along and everything like that. But for the most part, it's somewhat of a vague storyline. So if you guys are up for the task of like going through all the notes and going through a lot of, because there's a lot of notes in this game. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of heavy lifting for the player to do, which I think is awesome. And I think that, you don't see that. You see it very seldom in games nowadays, but you don't normally see it in a lot of story-driven games even. You don't see a lot of notes. Sometimes I think they make it hard on purpose for the player to find because they don't think they're going to actually read them, it's somewhat sad. I remember back in the day, like there were notes in games, and I think it's part and partial to the type of games that I would pick up personally, because I'm such a fan of finding notes in video games and finding notes and seeing like the backstories of these characters and seeing what their motives are and seeing how they evolve as people or things or whatever they may be. I don't want my opinion to reflect your purchasing choice, if I can speak. And I know that's the same with Susie. Unfortunately, she has to deal with, and the same with a lot of reviewers in the YouTube space, because a lot of people think that, oh yeah, no, a reviewer's word is we take it verbatim, we have to follow it to the T. You don't have to do that at all. Let me just say this before I get into my final point on this right now, is that you do not have to follow exactly anything we say. It's your money, it's your purchasing choice. You decide what's best for you. We're here to advise you. We, as reviewers, we are here to just simply advise and give you guys our best knowledge on the game and what we think of it, which is why I decided to come out with two versions for a game review, a spoiler-free version and a spoiler-heavy version, because there are people who want to see the entirety, spoilers and all, of the game before they make their purchasing choice, so they know exactly what they're getting into. There are people who don't want to know a damn thing about the game, and they only want to know bits and pieces about it in order to make that purchasing choice. We are here to simply inform and advise. That's all we're here to do. So, if you don't like the game, that's not on us. If you love the game, that also is not on us. Like, if we don't like the game, it doesn't mean that it is a bad game in general. If we love the game, it might not also mean that it's a great game in general. All of it is down to what our opinion is. That's it. For my last point of where I had no emotional connection to these characters whatsoever. The story was built in such a vague way of where I felt no emotional connection. Like, I thought that they were really cool, and I was like, ooh, what's gonna happen to this character next? What's gonna happen here? But that was the gist of it. Like, it didn't, after the game ended for me, I didn't feel sad or upset about the ending, because There are multiple endings, by the way. There are 4 multiple endings in this game, just so you guys know. And I feel sad or upset. I didn't feel like, oh, I should have done things differently. I just felt like it is what it is. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed my spoiler-free review of Signalis. If you guys like my face and what I do, please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell down below. I make videos every day here on YouTube. May you find your worth in the waking world, your hunter. Stay casually nerdy, and I will see you all in the next video. Umbasa.